just in time. I'm doing great, thank you. I'm really excited to start the study along session. So guys, today we'll be doing a follow along study session, and as the name implies, it would be great if you guys can join in along as well. Although you're free to watch if you want to. And you can do it using your media of choice. So you can do it traditionally, which I am going to do. Or you can do it digitally. So you can use Procreate, Paint Tool Sci, or Photoshop, or anything really. The ref is not on the server, but I think you guys may have a clue on which image we'll be studying. And it'll be the one that's on the top right of the screen. However, I will be posting up the higher res version on the Discord server. So if you guys are not on my Discord server already, you can find the link in the description below, where you'll be able to join a community of awesome artists, such as the ones that you see in the chat, and where I also do regular feedback and paint over, and even have Discord exclusive events. So if that sounds like your kind of thing and you want to see the reference in high res, then be sure to join. And I'll be posting it in the stream announcement, guys. The way I'm going to approach it is that I'm going to show you guys how I typically approach my composition studies in order to improve on my environment concept art. And I think this is a topic that I've been asked a few times already. And I do think that environments and composition is one of those things where you don't have as readily available information or exercises to do. Whereas when it comes to character studies, I believe that, there's quite a few ones that are available, such as gesture studies, figure drawing, simplifying things into boxes. Whereas with environments, I feel like that's a little bit more unavailable. I could be wrong, so if there is actually a great resource that you guys would like to share in the chat, please do so. And thanks a lot for the follow, Not an Artist, appreciate it. So over the years, with me scratching my head a lot of the times, I have actually tried and tested some methods to do studies with. And I'll be showing a couple of them on this stream today. So hopefully you guys will be able to get something out of it and even apply to your own artwork if you're interested in getting better at environments and architecture. So alright, without further ado guys, let's get things started. So how I usually start things off is just by drawing the approximate dimensions of things. And you'll notice that I'm not actually taking up the whole page. And I do that for quite a specific reason. Because the bigger that the page is, the more tempted that I am to actually start detailing things. Because there is so much more that I can do with just even tiny strokes. Whereas, taking it to an extreme, if I have a very, very tiny thumbnail, even just one tiny dab with my pencil stroke already takes up so much of the canvas. And with these studies, I try and focus on the bigger picture and not on the details. Details to me are just the icing on the cake. And once you have a solid understanding of how to lay down the basic shapes, how to find the horizon line, the vanishing points, details will just be a matter of time. The difficult part, in fact, is these initial strokes and fundamentals and foundations that you lay down. And Cheeky says, that's what I've always thought as well. Environments feels like it's a lot harder to practice and learn than characters. Interestingly enough though, Cheeky, some of the things that I've learned from doing studies for characters, I've been able to apply to my environment designs as well. And hey Rizal Faiz, great to see you, man. Welcome. We're just about to get things started, so if you want to join in on the study session, please do so. So, how exactly is it the same with character studies? Like for example, with characters, one of the things that you actually learn is that if you're trying to construct the form, you start off with basics. So if you're trying to construct the torso, you start off with a cube. and so on. So that's the head, and then the neck with the cylinder, basically breaking down the complex shape into much more simple and primitive forms. And then once you have that established, then you can actually put on the details and then figure out how the muscles actually look like, and so on and so forth. Oh, I see. I'm sorry, not an artist. I realized that it's not necessarily the most in focus, just because I am just dangling my webcam over my mic arm. So this is the best fidelity that we're gonna get. But I assure you guys that in the future, once I save up a bit more money and have a proper setup, I'll give you guys the highest resolution fidelity that you're gonna get. So hopefully this is good enough. But like I said, it's not gonna be focused on details, so you don't have to worry too much about it. So the first exercise that we're going to do is essentially just learning to break things down in the scene into simple shapes. And yes, better light source as well. Let me see what will happen if I turn off. Maybe this will be a bit better so that the shadows aren't as harsh. Or not. It's okay. Sorry guys. I'll figure it out. I'll figure out the lighting soon enough. But I appreciate the feedback. So let's also have the timer on. So we're going to be spending 25 minutes on this study. So first of all, for the first approach, it is going to be similar to this, where we're going to follow these steps. Is first of all, finding the horizon line. And then second of all, identifying vanishing points. And third of all, we're going to be simplifying components into basic shapes. And what I mean by basic shapes is that we're going to simplify it into cubes, cylinders, or even, actually, you know what, let's just simplify into cubes. Let's not go into cylinders just yet. Just simplifying it into cubes. So looking at this reference image, I'm going to find out where the horizon line is. And how you find the horizon line, guys, is that you trace back some of the the edges of the existing shapes in the composition, and try to see where two parallel edges intersect. So in this case, since I don't have the liberty of actually tracing it over, I'm going to estimate that from this building, seeing where this building goes, the parallel edge goes, it's going to be around here. So it's around a quarter way down from the page. So I'm actually going to divide the page in half and then a quarter. Oh, and thanks a lot for the follow. I heard a different notification sound. So I apologize if I missed something. Oh, Califera, thank you a lot for the host. Really appreciate it. So I'm actually going to divide the page, as I said, into a quarter. And that's where the horizon line is. And we're just going to start off as that. And why it's so important to identify the horizon line is because it'll determine where the camera is and where you'll be placing the vanishing point. And where the camera angle will be will influence how you perceive the image, so it'll influence the mood. And also in terms of how you'll be perceiving some of the objects in the piece. Because if the camera is way down, for example, I like this shot just because you're looking up at the tower essentially. And it makes it feel quite epic. So if I'm trying to make a scene or a shot where I want something epic, then I'm going to think back to this study and remember that, okay, I have to place the horizon line somewhere lower, maybe around a quarter of the piece as well. And the advantage of this camera angle is that you're able to see some of the ground as well. Whereas to make something extra epic, you're gonna typically have it off of the canvas. However, you're essentially just looking way up into the sky and you can't see the streets. So this is a good compromise for a shot where you can see yourself looking up at something, but at the same time, still being able to see the street as well. So that's something to keep in mind. And what I think you need to do when doing a study is to be as mindful as you can and thinking about why you like the image, what does it show you, and what kind of things you can learn from it. So that's one aspect. So finding the horizon line is simple enough. And second of all is identifying the vanishing point. So it's the same thing as before. So you're going to try to find the vanishing point where essentially two parallel edges meet when you draw them into the horizon line. So guessing from this image, it looks like it will be somewhere off the page and then around here. And then with the bottom edge as well, I'm gonna trace it back to the horizon line. So it's somewhere around there. And I realized that the buildings are not all in one straight line, but for the sake of this exercise, I'm gonna treat it as if it is. And this is also the advantage of drawing your thumbnails quite small, is that you can draw things off the page. So for example, if there's a vanishing point way off the page, I can actually trace it all the way here. Whereas if I make it the whole page, then it's going to be a little bit difficult because I might have to ghost it off of the page. So since I found one of the horizon lines or vanishing points on the horizon line, I'm just going to extend. And then I'm going to trace it all the way up as well. So in a way, radiating it out. And very lightly. I'm just going to do it very lightly. Just so I don't create such a strong mark that I can't erase. So we've done the first two things on the checklist, which is identifying the horizon line and then the vanishing point. So the next step is to simplify the components in the composition into basic shapes. So this does require some basic knowledge of perspective. So if you guys are not too familiar with that, hopefully this will at least give you guys a little bit of a better idea. But for those of you that do, I'm not gonna go too much in depth into it. So I'm gonna start off with this tower in the back, and I'm noticing that it's falling around the third of the canvas. And I think that's something that's actually quite important when you're doing these compositions, is trying to identify space or spatial positioning of the elements, because this is something that you will be learning and then applying into your own piece. So what I mean by that, this is something as simple as pure observation. So just looking at the image here and then thinking to yourself, okay, where does this element lie on the image? So does it lie halfway, a quarter, a third? And Fantas says being conscious about space on the page is actually really good. Definitely. It's something that is more observational, and sometimes it can go on the wayside if we're focusing too much on the technical aspects and we're not relying on something as obvious as simple observation. And Fantas also says, I never considered it relative to the composition and not just for completing the study. Ah, I see, man. Yeah, I think it's something that I've also been doing more recently. Whereas back then, I was just a bit stubborn in trying to just follow the grid and the horizon line and vanishing point so strictly that it became a little bit more hit and miss. Whereas this one, I think, would solve a lot of heartache. Alright, enjoy your breakfast then, not an artist. I'll see you back in a bit. And hey Xylin, welcome to the stream, dude. You're not too late to join in now. So as I was saying earlier, try and identify where it is in terms of the spatial positioning. It relative to the canvas. Relative to canvas. So I would say maybe it's not a third, but it's more of a quarter. So I'm going to divide the page into a half and then a quarter. That's where it will lie. And going back to this first checklist that we made, it says that we need to simplify the components into basic shapes. So that would mean just cubes in this case. So I'm going to follow the horizon line or the vanishing point. I keep on mixing it up. And in this case as well, I'm also just going to trace back the vanishing point off the page. And going a little off track here, guys, it's important for you to even figure out the distance between each of the vanishing points as well in relation to the canvas. So for example, this vanishing point you can say is maybe a third of the whole canvas off to the side. Whereas the vanishing point over here is 1, 2, 2, yeah, maybe around 2 thirds, 2 and a third of the way off to the side. And why that's important is that then next time when you're trying to make a similar composition or camera lens to this, you can think about just how far you go off the canvas for one vanishing point and how far you go off the canvas for the other. And while at first it may seem very technical, over time you will actually get a sense for it to the point that it's become ingrained into you or that you can eyeball it. And hey Yoming, great to see you on the stream. Welcome. We're just getting started on the study, so if you do want to join in, feel free to do so. Oh, and Yomi is also a fellow streamer as well, and she does a lot of great cute art, so be sure to check out her stream as well. She's making a push for a partner, I believe. So if you can help her out, I think she would greatly appreciate that. So back to what I was saying. Thinking about the spacing between vanishing points is also really important. That's another thing that I really focus on. So after doing that, I'm just going to continue drawing the cube. So sorry if I'm kind of going off tangent a little bit, but these are the finer points that I'm also just remembering and also recalling as I'm doing the study. So as I do more of these and get a little bit more practice showing you guys, I think it'll go a lot smoother. So once again, just simplifying it into a simple cube. And then just to fast forward a bit, I'm going to draw this wall over here. And then for this one, it's off screen. So I'm just gonna keep it as a simple line. Then with the buildings in the front, I'm going to just simplify them as cubes. And I realize that there's a sloped roof. You guys can do it if you want to, but I'm really just keeping it very simple. And the reason that I do that is that when I commit to a slope, it makes it a little bit more difficult later on for me to use this as a template of sorts. And I can show you what I mean by that after this, where we apply the study. So I'm gonna draw in the bottom, the floor, the building, then trace this back as well, pull this down, and that's it. So while it may seem that it took us like 15 minutes to get to this stage, usually when I'm doing a study, let's just say of a different image, this is going to be how fast I do it in real-time speed. So let me just erase this so I have a bit more space. So I'm gonna draw the canvas, find the horizon line, then find the vanishing point. And then find the relative positioning. There's this tower in the middle, and now another tower around the quarter, and then another tower around the quarter. And then while this is just for the vertical placement, you'll notice that there's horizontal elements as well. So the horizontal element is around halfway across the page, and then a quarter down the page. Then I'm actually gonna just keep it to simple 2D shapes in this case. And then the trees in the background, I'll just simplify into pure triangles. Actually, I might even not put in the trees just because they share the same design language as the towers, and it's causing a little bit of a mix-up. So yeah, I mean, if I'm doing my own study, I'll just be essentially doing it in about a minute. But this is the same way that a character artist would practice gesture studies, where they would, start off with a circle and then draw the lines and then so on and so forth. So in the same way for me, I built up that instinct that I can just simplify a lot of the complexities into simpler gestures. So how's everyone getting along with their studies so far? And hopefully what I'm saying is also making sense. And if there's anything that you guys want me to clarify as well, do let me know. I'll be more than happy to explain it in more detail. Just take a sip of water as well. Koro says basic shapes bring so much What does that mean though? Is that bring so much joy? Bring so much agony? Awesome, great to hear that, Fanta. And there's also other techniques as well. For example, if you guys are struggling with finding the angle for something, let's just say that you want to find the actual angle for this line in relation to the vanishing point, or even just trying to draw exactly the right angle. Oh, sorry guys. Let me bring it back into focus. So one trick that you can do is literally just, let's just say that we have this building right here, or a cube, and you're trying to draw the exact same angle of this line right here. One thing you can do is actually just bring out your pencil against the reference image, and you try to see the angle that you're getting as a result of you dividing it, or at least creating a triangle from, or an angle from. So then you can use your estimation, maybe it's like 27.5 degrees. So what you're gonna do is just get 45 degrees and then divide that by 2. Drew says, bring it on. Cora says, nah, they're hella important. Yeah, it's definitely the basic building blocks. And I really do mean that. If you can actually draw cubes in perspective, you can pretty much draw anything. And Fishes, my dish says, can't follow along, unfortunately, but I'll be watching the VOD later today. Alright, not a problem. And welcome to the stream, by the way, Fish. Great to see you again. And looks like a small fight has broken out between Drew and Koro. Alright, so back to topic. So as I said, you can actually just put your pencil out to the reference image and then try and see the angle that is created. So for these trickier angles, you can just put out your pencil and then see that tiny angle that's been created, and then you just do your best to replicate this tiny shape that you just created. So that's another small tip as well. So alright, that's the initial study. So now it's the bigger question, is how on earth am I going to apply it? And I firmly believe that one of the reasons why a lot of studies are not effective is that people seem to get the wrong idea of what a study is for. So what comes to mind, for example, when I talk about studies? I think a lot of people think about master studies where you're just directly copying one-on-one what you're seeing. The colors, the details, everything, composition. And that's fine. You can do that if you want. However, I do think an effective study is a study that directly addresses the issue of what you are struggling with. And that's why in this case, I've specifically called it a composition study. Not a detail study. Not a color study. That will come later on. It's just composition. The more specific your study is, the more effective it will become. So that's something that I think that is really important to keep in mind. And Drew says, yeah, all I know is color studies where you draw exactly what you see. And Koro says, I think of anatomy studies. And Drew also says, I feel like drawing for imagination and then checking with some reference is also a good study kind. You can. That's I would say that that's actually one good approach to think about what you should be studying from. Is that typically I execute, so I have my own piece, I execute, and then I figure out what I struggle with. And then I do a study based off of that. And then after that, I'm going to apply the study. So you can immediately apply it to a piece, or you can do an isolated application, which I will be doing right after this. And then after you apply it, you're going to execute it again. And this is I think most effective way of improving is a balance between execution, finding out what you're struggling with, addressing what you're struggling with your study, applying your study, then learning to apply it within your own personal project. So you can say that the application stage is you learning to ride with some training wheels. So you're not completely taking them off, but neither are you riding on something that's completely on guide rails where you're just copying things mindlessly, but at the same time not so difficult that you have absolutely nothing to go off of. And the execution is where you can say you're put to the test. And Koro says, I sketch first so I know that what I'm getting into, then look for refs, because I gotta see what I want. But sometimes I look for refs first because I have thoughts of something, I just don't know how to convey it. So I take like 10 different refs to see what I want. The good old research. Yeah, I think that's I think that goes a little bit beyond study and more into the idea of reference gathering. So that's another topic for another day. So anyways, back into this. I will show you guys how exactly we can apply now this piece to do a study off of, or an application off of it. So I'm gonna go back to it, and then I'm going to try to remember all of those things that we were talking about just before. So first of all, going back to a checklist, what's the first thing? Horizon line. So let's just say that I actually don't look at the reference. So I'm actually not going to be looking at my screen. I'm just going to be looking at my sketchbook. So I remember that the horizon line was a quarter of the page down from the top. Or at least a quarter of the page up from the bottom. I think that's a better way of putting it. So that's what I remember. And then second of all, I remember that there was a tower that was a quarter of a page to the left of the canvas. So as you notice, I'm actually doing abstract divisions of the page right now, and this is how I approach it. But you guys can even go for the vanishing point first. And I remember that the vanishing point was around a third off of the canvas. A third of the canvas off of the canvas. So if that's a third, I'm gonna pull it all the way here and then pull it up. So you don't always exactly have to have the vanishing point on the page, and you'll get a good sense of where to put it after a while. And another trick is that if your vanishing point is off of the canvas and you want to find out how to draw this next line in between, here's a nifty little trick. As long as you know the horizon line, you divide where one line intersects with the canvas, the edge of the canvas. You divide that by half in between the horizon line and that intersecting line, and then you do the same for the other point where the same line exits the canvas on the other side. So around here, then you just pull it across, and that is going to all trace back to the same vanishing point. And you can do the same here as well, where you divide that by half and divide this by half, and that would be tracing back to the same vanishing point. So that's a really nifty trick that I learned a while back. And alright guys, it looks like the timer for a stretch break has just gone off. So let's all take a quick breather and come back in about a minute or so, and let's just take a small break just so we can come back refreshed. And thanks a lot for the follow, that onion. Alright, let's all take a quick stretch break, guys. Maybe we should do a follow along stretch break as well, where I show you guys some good stretches to prevent sore wrists or back. Yeah, good idea. I'll have some water too. Oh man, my neck is so creaky. Exactly. Stretch all that brain muscle. Stretching bits. Some other time. First, composition. Composition studies. Next would be stretching studies. Alright guys, so hopefully you all had a nice stretch break as well, and just time to rehydrate. So from now on, I think we can speed things up a bit, so we can actually get to the proper meat of things. So let me reset the timer. So going back to what I was saying, that's the vanishing point. It's about a third off of the page. And then the other vanishing point I remember being 2 canvas widths and a third. 2 and a third canvas widths. So 1, 2, 3, around here. So I'm just gonna very faintly dot it on and then trace out the lines. So very lightly. And then let's fast forward things a bit. I remember that the cube is here. Then this one goes all the way across and there's a line there. Then you can see a little bit of the floor underneath the vanishing point. And that's it. So that's the foundation that we're going to be starting with. And how are we going to apply this to our own study? So that even just being able to recall the image, I think will be good enough practice. However, what I've been doing recently is just adding my own design on top of this, just so it becomes a little bit more locked in. I feel like the more actively engaged I am with my studies, and the more it forces me to think a little bit more for myself, the more sealed in it becomes. So for all of the other studies that I've done recently, so this is all the same process. You can see the pencil sketches, and I've been doing the pen sketches to accompany that. Very simple pen sketches. Then that's the line work that I've done on top of it. So that's what we're gonna do. So what I'm gonna do right now is to actually look at a different design language. So this is something that you guys can do if you want to. Although if you're quite content with just doing this simple composition studies, that's fine. So I'm going to be applying a different design language. So let's just do something that's a little bit more familiar, I think, to... Okay, maybe not a castle. How about this? I believe it's Florence, in Florence. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys. But I'm gonna apply that same design language here. So I'm actually going to be applying this nice tower that I see. And why this is actually really good practice to do, in my opinion, is because sometimes you can borrow a composition from an image that you have and apply new design language to it, and essentially it'll be something new, something you can even say it's your own design, and something you can just be inspired by. So, and then I really like those circular motifs as well on the tower. And then I'm noticing that there's these dome shapes that come out of the side, so I'm gonna put that in. So in this case, I'm kind of just going ahead and not explaining too much about the underlying fundamentals, but this is how I would proceed with my composition studies afterwards. And I really like these diagonal arches, I don't know what you would call it, that are coming out from the side. So I'm gonna replicate that here. So let me try and pull this closer to the camera. And then I also really like these arch windows on the side, and then the pillars. And then at the bottom as well, I'm noticing that there's these blocks, so I'm gonna put them in, the blocks that I see here. Just gonna keep it simple. And thanks a lot for the follow, Hella, really appreciate it. So okay, keeping it simple, but I feel like the foreground is really missing something. So what I'm gonna do is just maybe, as a simple solution, add some stairs leading into it. So I want to be careful that it's not going to be exactly in the same position as the tower, because a lot of elements, for example, if you have a composition like this where you have a tower here and that's the horizon line, let's just say, I don't want my character to be exactly under the tower, because if I draw a line down, it's sharing the same space. What you want to do for a more effective composition is that you're going to have the tower there, but then have the character at the bottom here, so that there's some breathing room and the silhouette isn't shared, or even the space on the canvas. So that's the reasoning that I'm putting the stairs a little bit offset. And no worries, Koro, really appreciate you dropping by. Hopefully you'll be able to stay for longer, and yeah, hope you have a great rest of the day. Well, I'm happy to hear that you enjoyed it as well. Really hope that you can drop by the next one. And it's really nice to meet you too. Until next time then, take care. So drawing the stairs, and then I'm just gonna add a few more elements in the foreground, because this was one simple chunk. So in order to really frame this chunk of simplicity, I'm gonna add a bit more details here, so it feels like there's one nice shape here. So now that I've done that, I'm going to start lining things. Alright, see you, Koro, take care. So I'm gonna start lining things. So if you guys are still follow along at this stage, this is going to be the fun part where you can start detailing things. And try to have something that's decent. It doesn't have to be super detailed. Keep it simple, because I'm going to be going to the colors next, guys. So I'm going to show you guys how I then bring this to colors after that. So you can say it's a 3-in-1 study. So you guys are in for a treat today. And hopefully you guys are learning something from it as well. Hey Alexaniel, great to see you, man. Welcome. Great to see you again. So right now I'm just on the detailing stage. So I've just been doing a follow along study, Alexaniel's. So while you may have missed quite a bit of it, feel free to just try to catch up. I realize that there's, yeah, it might be quite a bit behind now. But you can always watch the VOD later on as well if you're interested in seeing what we've covered so far. Yeah, I really wish that the camera was better though. Wonder if there's something that I can elevate and put on. Let's see. Oh, I think I know what I can do. Be right back, guys. Just gonna use my switch box. There we go. How's that for our smart solution? High IQ thinking. But it's not the most comfortable to draw position to draw in. See, this is what you get, guys, from doing these composition studies. You also get extra creativity points in real life as well. So I promise you, it's helpful even outside of art. studies have not only shown that you become more flexible from watching this stream, but also have your IQ points increase as well. So I'm gonna get through this relatively quickly, but you're gonna notice that I'm not putting in too many details, just kind of keeping the shapes quite simple. And the reason behind that is so I just can color it easier later on, and that I don't end up going past my time limit. And I've actually recently been doing these studies daily, and I've been doing it for about 25 minutes each sketch, 25 minutes to half an hour. But I suppose showing it on stream and talking about it does make it a little bit slower. Okay, I'm just gonna do the windows right now. And I realize my hand is covering the whole thing. Sorry guys. I'll remove my fat hand. Let me just move it like this. And then adding some really tiny windows to sell the scale more. You'll notice that as we get closer to the focal point, we're actually going to increase the detail density. So what I mean by that is that I'm going to add in a lot more concentration of details there. So even looking at the reference images, I can take cues. So for example, I can make the tiles here show up. So it's to define the materials as well a little bit. And I'm choosing to keep the foreground quite simple as well. So now to finish it off, I'm just going to add in the frame. Maybe a few dots and dashes here. And then I think I'm gonna add in a cloud as well. So I'm just gonna have a cloud that cuts across. Yeah, not too happy with the placement of the cloud, but you get the idea. Then a hint at a mountain. Alright. So that's it. This is actually the extent that I'll be taking the study for today. It's quite simple. I would usually add in a bit more details, but I think for the sake of keeping the demo moving along, maybe I'll add a few details here to break the simplicity of this silhouette. And then add in a few roof tiles as well. There we go. Let me zoom in. And thanks a lot for the follow, Sims Life. Really appreciate it. Gotta hold it still. Come on, focus. Focus, webcam. Oh man. Well, that's the best my webcam can do. Gotta start a GoFundMe to buy a camera for me. Thanks a lot, Alexandria. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna erase. So just as a quick recap, guys, this is the study that we did, the initial shapes and composition. And you'll notice that by using the building blocks of these simple cubes, I was able to slap on a new design language onto it and create something that's different. And I think that little bit of difference just forces your brain to actively engage with your study a bit more. And I think just changing some factor of the study, whether it's the design language or maybe later on just the fact that you're changing the color, the mood, whatever it may be. Any sort of change will make you more actively engage with your study. Thanks a lot for the follow, Hobo AC. Really appreciate it. And one of the reasons why I think those master copies are not necessarily so helpful for some people is that they're just copying everything. There's no part of that brain that has to think outside the box and maybe think of a solution beyond what they're already seeing. All of the solutions are presented to them right in front of them. So my analogy is that, yeah, just try doing the study with training wheels, really, where you're getting closer and closer to the real thing, which is riding a bicycle, but it still requires you to be challenged and engaged with it a little bit more. Hopefully that makes sense. And Fantas says the goal is to complete the study rather than to analyze the art piece by piece. Definitely. Complete the objective of your study and that's it. So what I'm gonna do, guys, is that I'm gonna take a picture of it, and what I'm gonna do is post up this image onto the Discord server. And if you haven't been following along with the study so far but would like to follow along for the next section, which is the color study, then you can find the image and work off of it as well. So I've already posted it up. And for those of you that don't know, there is a link to the Discord server in the description box below. So if you want to be able to access the image that I just posted and also be a part of an awesome community of artists, then be sure to join that. Would love to have you there. So how's everyone getting along with their studies so far? If you have been following along, I'd love to see what you've done in the studies channel on the Discord server. I'm just gonna take a quick drink. Awesome, glad to hear that, Axel. And no worries, man. And Haigo says, I have been. I think I'm gonna try to detail the application a bit more than post it. Awesome, dude. Yeah, I know it's not necessarily the most clear on my webcam right now. But yeah, thanks for bearing with me, guys. I realized that some of my explanations and analogies may be a little bit long-winded or maybe not as clear. But this is my first time actually trying, or second time, trying to put what has just been in my head into something that I can share with someone. So even my way of explaining things is a big work in progress. So any feedback that you guys have so far would be greatly appreciated, or even at the end of the session as well. And let's see what people have done so far. Oh, fantastic. Drew has done a really nice study so far, and I will show you guys on the screen. Let me just pop it up, and I'll change windows to main scene. So I have my Photoshop open now, and this is what Drew has done so far. It's looking great. I really like the fact that you just changed it into trees. And I don't know if something that you intentionally did, Drew, but the fact that you introduced trees is actually helping the composition, because the original reference image is all quite monotone in terms of materials, but you introducing something else, some other material, really helps to just break up the image a lot more. And Drew says I have shaky hands today. It's all good. I mean, as Bob Ross says, sometimes having shaky hands can give you a little bit of an advantage when you're drawing, you know, foliage, for example, because you want that natural feeling to your art. I think that's always the interesting part, isn't it? Is that sometimes there's things that we do that we can't necessarily explain, but it's so instinctual within us. And the tricky part is being able to explain it into words. And that's yeah, what I'm currently going through right now. Just one quick piece of feedback though, Drew. Make sure that your building traces back to the horizon line too, or the vanishing point, as you have established on your page as well. So once you tilt it, I think things would feel a lot more solid. So if anyone else has their study that they want to post up, please do so now. Otherwise, I'm just going to be moving on to the colors next. And once again, if you haven't been following along with the study but would love to do the colors, you can find my image in the stream announcement section on my Discord server, where you can do colors right on that one. And Hygo's just posted his up. Oh, very nice, dude. And this is Hygo's piece. Really nicely done. I like the architectural style. And you did an extra piece of study as well. That's great. Yeah, this one I think would be a really good one to do the colors on next. So let me also prepare my image for coloring. And since we have about 1 minute and 50 seconds before the timer goes off, I'm actually going to start after the timer goes. But what I'd like to do is just to crop it. But I'm going to extend it later on. But right now I'm just going to crop the image. And then resize it a bit, I believe. So it's not too tiny. Maybe size of 1500. Oh wait, what? No! Darn it, Photoshop. Sorry guys. Looks like Photoshop has disabled its OpenGL render or something like that. So it's not allowing me to do my scrubby zoom. So let me create a new document. There we go. CC 2020, the newest one. But it's been giving me quite a few problems, which is annoying. Alright, the timer for stretching has just gone off, guys. So let's take a quick breather before we jump onto the colors. Oh, and I'll also check out CCs as well. Yes, I can definitely do that and just leave it on the screen. Ah, fantastic. So this is CC study. I would say that one piece of feedback, CC, is that try to make the tower stand out more, just because in this case, if you trace it back, it's quite close to the roof. And as a result, I feel like it doesn't make as strong as a focal point as it could be. So even just taking this bit and then extending it up, just so it goes way beyond the roof, I think it'll be a stronger focal point. So it's a tiny bit of feedback, but I think it makes a difference. So it's just a little bit of an adjustment. Thanks for bringing that to my attention, Drew. And before we jump into the colors, let's take a quick break now, guys. Alright, just taking a quick stretch. Alright. So let's also move the camera back to its rightful place, which is on my face, or pointing towards my face. And Dan Dimitrov Art says CC 2020 has been pretty buggy for me, to be honest. I keep switching back to 2019. Yeah, it's been a lot worse than 2019. I'm not sure how I can revert back, but it's fine. I guess I've kind of learned to live with the bugginess of 2020. And welcome to the stream, of course, Dan Dimitrov. Really appreciate you being here. Let me clean up the webcam a bit too. There we go. Alright, just gonna lower the mic so it doesn't block my face. And we are going to be starting on the coloring section, guys. So let me save this as well. So drop composition plus color study 01. Alright. So my pure ref is up here, and this is a reference image that I picked out ahead of time, which I want to apply to my scene. So if you guys want to use it, I will be posting it up as well on the stream announcement section. Color reference, so we can all be on the same page. However, if you want to use your own, feel free to do so. Let's restart the timer. So before I start with my colors, I actually like to work in values first, or at least it's something that I have been doing for my studies to solidify my color sense. Because once your values are strongly established, then the heavy lifting will be done for you, and it will be much easier for you to decide which color that you should choose and pick in order to get to a final image. And this is actually something that I've been quite stubborn with when I was starting out in my art journey. I actually failed to see the connection why values are so important, because values essentially just deal with black and white, and most of the things that we'll be doing later on, or it will lead into its colors, and I just didn't know how to do it and why it would be useful. And values is essentially just the brightness of things. And so if we turn this image to values, it would look something like this. And notice that even with this image in values, you can clearly read things from one another. It's not the strongest in terms of composition, but at least you can clearly differentiate one thing from another. So if you're able to establish a strong foundation of values, then going into colors will just be a matter of shifting the hue and saturation. So you're addressing the different components of what comprises a color, which is hue, saturation, and value. If we address the values first, all we need to worry about is the hue and saturation. So what I'm gonna do to start things off is that I'm going to go on top of my sketch, just because it's a traditional sketch and the lines are merged directly onto my lines or onto the canvas. I'm just going to be doing the values on top of my lines. So how I started off is that I actually just start off with 3 values, and which is black or near black, because I still wanted to be seen underneath black lines. Next is mid-gray, so smack dab in the middle, and then near white as well, very near white, just so I can see it stand out from the canvas a bit more. So these are the 3 values that I'll start off with. I believe that starting off with these values, it will take out a lot of that intimidation, because in a fully finished image, it will just take on the whole spectrum, and it's easy to be overwhelmed or to really figure out how to work up towards that level of complexity. And I deeply struggled with that, and this approach has really helped me to just take things one step at a time. And Fantis also asked, this is probably a question for later, but how do you tackle as a color gets more saturated, the value gets darker in regards to starting in grayscale? I'll see how I can answer that later. I'll keep that in mind, although it's a bit hard for me to explain in a vacuum. So bear with me for a moment, Fantis. So right now, what I'm actually going to start off with is just focusing on light and shadow. Let me write that down a bit neater. So the light will be represented by the near white, and the shadow will be represented by the near black. So that's all that we're going to start off with. So I'm going to have a new layer, and then I will set it to multiply, and then I will just paint in the shadows. Don't worry about the local colors and all the different colors and the different materials. Just worry about where the shadow is falling and then where the light is. So I'm just doing that, just using 2 values. And I think even for someone that has barely done any value studies, telling them to do it with 2 values would take a lot of that intimidation factor out. And of course you might be wondering, it's like, how the hell would this actually help me to get into colors? I will get to that after this. So I'm just painting in the shadows, just the shadows. And of course this requires some knowledge of forms and all of that, so this might seem like it's a big ask for some people, but try and follow your reference image, or you can even, yeah, unfortunately this is an overcast, so that's not gonna be much help. So I'm planning to have it backlit, so I'm going for a little bit more of a dramatic lighting. The lighting is also coming from the top right, a bit higher. Then gonna add some shadows here. Just keep it broad for now, guys. Don't worry too much about the finer details. I'm also gonna color this window in, and then the underside. And then after that, yeah, I think I'm gonna keep most of the foreground. Let's see. Maybe some in shadow, so I'm relying on some sort of off-screen lighting or off-screen object that's casting the shadow, just to break up the monotony of this area a bit more, just to make it interesting. And you'll notice that even when it comes to my shadow design, if I turn off the lights, you'll notice that there's different sizes of value shapes. And value shapes are essentially unbroken chunks of value. So if I had to put a paint bucket tool on top of this, this would all connect together and all be colored in, because they're still touching despite the complexity of the shape. But you'll notice that here it's in its own isolated island, and so is this one, and not this one actually, it's connected. This one, yeah, no. And then you have one chunk here, and then you have a few separate chunks here. And I'm sure quite a few of you have heard of large, medium, and small, or the principles, or how it's used in design to create interesting contrast and variety. And hey Frapupu, great to see you in the chat. Welcome to the stream. Just currently moving on to this coloring section right now. So if you want to join in, you can find some of the reference images in stream announcement and the Discord server. But otherwise, hope you enjoy this stream. So going back to large, medium, and small, you'll notice that this large chunk is large because it's one huge chunk. Then there's a medium. Then there's a bunch of smalls. So even in your shadow design, you want to, or light design, whatever you want to call it, it has to be interesting and varied even in terms of the shapes. That's something that's very important. A lighting scenario that wouldn't be so good is something that you have a bunch of separate shapes. And let's just say something like this, maybe. I guess it's a little bit difficult to even purposefully make it bad actually. But yeah, maybe something like this wouldn't be quite as successful in my opinion. Where if I turn it off, actually it's okay-ish. If I actually had to, it's not too bad. But as you can see, there's a lot more small shapes. And yeah, even the shape of the larger one isn't that interesting. So even when we look at the shadows itself, it doesn't really describe this form so well. And I do believe that a good way to light the scene is when you describe the forms of the objects in a scene very well. So this, I feel, describes the drawing much better than this. And also abiding by the large, medium, and small, there's an overabundance of small shapes in comparison to the medium or large ones. Large, you definitely want one. So if you have one large shape, you maybe want two medium shapes, or one medium shape and a couple of small ones. But you definitely don't want to have actually, I don't know if you would want too many large shapes. I haven't tested it out. So hold that thought. I'm not gonna say anything about it. But it's good to have a variety. I'll just put it that much. So anyways, back to what I was saying. Or back to the study. So this is all done already. The shadow. So that's step 1. Step 1 is done. And step 2 is figure, or let's make it simple, exposure. So when we're talking about exposure, or if something is exposed properly, is essentially going to be either the light or the shadow that has the largest range of values in comparison to, or has a larger range of values in comparison to the other. And I'm sure you guys have heard or know that when you're taking a picture with your mobile phone, that when you have something that's overexposed, it means that the light areas are so overblown that they're close to being completely white, that you can't really tell what's going on there. And when something's underexposed, it's basically everything it's things that in the shadow that are kind of flattening into one value. And the value range is very, very narrow. However, when something is exposed properly, then it's going to be something that has the largest range of values. So how does that exactly relate to our study right now? So what we actually have to figure out next is what we want to be in exposure. Do we want the shadow to be in exposure? Or do we want the light to be in exposure? And in this case, based on the reference image that I have, I actually want it to be in the light. So what do I do if I actually want the exposure to be in the light? So I'm going to select the mid-gray, and I'm going to paint within the light, not the shadow. So this mid-gray will represent the differences between the local colors. So local colors are essentially that, imagine if something is in the exact same lighting scenario, and for the sake of this explanation, in an overcast lighting scenario. And I know that this is that this is overcast. You'll notice that the value for the plant is darker than the bricks, and that the value for the wood is actually darker than the bricks or the cobblestone. So that difference in local values will only be seen, or at least most apparent, because of the increased value range of something that is in exposure. I'm glad to hear that, Drew. Sometimes I actually wonder if I'm just blabbering on and not making any sense. So if there's something that you guys want me to explain better or want me to repeat, let me know. It would greatly help me out, guys. It's one of my first few times doing this, so I'm also practicing to be much more concise. So any feedback will be greatly appreciated. And let me just take a sip of water as well. And thanks a lot for the follow, Boincano. Really appreciate it. Sorry guys. So since I want the exposure to be in the light, I actually want to describe the differences between the local colors more. And I know that I want the roof to be darker than the main building structure. And Nita asks, how do you pick the focal point in an environment piece? Well, it's something that you do decide at the start. And in this case, I want it to be the tower. And essentially, a focal point is an area that has the highest amount of contrast. So in this case, the reason why it stands out as a focal point is that it stands out in the silhouette the most. So even when you look at the line drawing, if I had to translate everything into a pure silhouette, you'll notice that the tower kind of stands out the most because it's the largest thing and it's the only singular largest thing. And you can say that there's also a difference that, you know, this part sticks out a bit more, makes it feel a bit more complex. Whereas this one, you might think that, hang on, that's kind of the same shape though, and there's actually 3 of them. But because it's repeated 3 times, it becomes a pattern. And when something becomes a pattern, it's much easier to ignore it or at least see it as background noise. And same goes for these, I don't know what they call it, battlements? Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but these things don't stick out as the focal point even though there's a lot of them. Actually, because there's a lot of them. Usually, when you're talking about a point of high contrast, it's one of the only parts in the scene that has that specific element. So if I really wanted to push this, maybe I could introduce a triangle, which is something that hasn't really been used much. And as you can see, it starts to stand out a lot more. And maybe there's a bit of foliage on top as well. And because there's no foliage on any other part of the scene, that area immediately stands out a lot more. So just to answer your question, Nita, it's something that you think about at the start, and the way that you have the viewer acknowledge it's a focal point as well is by you using the elements of contrast. So hopefully that answers your question. And thanks a lot for the follow, Narchitecto. Really appreciate it. Okay, back to the colors. So I just recently added the mid-gray, which controls the exposure or what area is in exposure. And I want this roof to also be darker here as well. And then maybe I want this part to be darker and then maybe here as well. And maybe here. So I want to create a little bit of patterning. And you'll notice that it's starting to read. even just from values. So before and after. And then I'm going to create a new layer behind, and I'm going to select the sky. And I can do the sky as a flat first, and I'll show you how that can work out. Hey, what's going on there? Oh, there we go. So let me do this. I'm not going to paint bucket. I'm gonna paint it so we get those really nice paintbrush strokes. So as you can see, just by introducing the gray, that goes back to what I was talking about when it comes to contrast nita, is that this is one of the areas where you have a lot of value combinations. You can argue that this is the same too, but once again, this has the added contrast of having a dominant silhouette. So dominant silhouette plus gray plus white plus black, and then the white is on a gray, which makes it stand out a bit more. Then you have the dark black against a white area. When you have all of those elements working together, it creates a much stronger point of contrast. So there's a lot of things that you can play with in order to make a focal point. So let me erase this as well, just so that there's something nice there. Okay, so that's it for the values. This is all that you need, guys. And I will show you how I transition from the values into color. So let me actually put this part into mid-gray as well. Alright, so just using 3 values, we've been able to describe this image in terms of the value structure that we want. So I'm going to name this folder value. I'm going to minimize it. I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to create another one to the side. So this is going to be the exciting part, guys. Awesome, I'm really happy to hear that, Narchitecto. And Alexandria says, I feel like I'm going back to school. Well, the good thing is you guys aren't being graded for this, so... So how are you guys getting along so far? I'm actually curious to know how many of you have been following along with this study up until this point. Props to you guys actually if you have been, and just having the stamina to listen to me for 1.5 hours straight so far. All of my coffee's gone. And Jimmy says, this is great. Although I didn't get the mid value. Do I paint with gray, all colors, and save light values for light colors? Yes, essentially the white here, this is going to be for your light colors. So your brightest colors are going to be reserved for this lighter value. And then all of your darker colors will be reserved for this mid value. And later on, as we refine it, you'll notice that I've only used 3 values so far. So this is the whole value spectrum. Let me do this. I think this might actually make it a little bit clearer. Let me just color it in. And that's the mid. And then that's the white. So if I 50%. So this is the value spectrum. And so far, we've only used 3 values. So we've used this, and we've used this, and we've used that. So later on, as we're coloring, this is the full range that we'll get to use. And so if this is halfway, this will be the full range that we'll be getting to use for the colors in exposure. So this is going to be the light. And then this chunk over here is all that we're going to be using for the shadow. And of course, this is assuming that there's no atmosphere and other fancy lighting effects, and assuming that this is all also in the same lighting scenario. So the moment you have different light sources, it will be a different story, but let's not overcomplicate things now. So once again, to recap, Jimmy, is that this is the area in exposure. And going back to what we said, what does an area in exposure mean? It means that exposure largest value range. So as you can see, we have so much more to work with in the light compared to the shadow. And for those of you guys that have been very observant, you might notice that, hang on, why aren't we using this area for the values? And that's because this will be a little bit of a no man's land, that when you actually enter into it, you make your lights this dark and you make your shadows that bright, they'll start to share the same area. And when you start to share the same area, this is what you will get, what is called muddy values. You won't really be able to tell what's in shadow, what's in light, and then everything will just seem mushy and then flat throughout. And while there are people that play around with it and they don't stick to this rule and still able to create a great composition, or not composition, sorry, great color scheme, this is one of the ways that I think really helped me to understand colors and values much more easily. So as you guys become much more experienced later on, you can play around with it, but just for the sake of this exercise, let's just stick to this explanation. So hopefully it's making sense so far, guys. And let me just shift this to the side so that I can extend this. Alright, so before we jump into the colors, let's take a very quick stretch break. And just one more timer cycle, guys. We'll be wrapping the color study up in 25 minutes. So hang in there. I know that's been quite a while. So I really appreciate you guys sticking by so far. Alright, just as the timer has gone off as well, so we'll reset that in a bit. And before then, I'll just read out a few comments in the chat. And Drew has been saying, I've been actively listening, at least something. And Fish is cleaning the house while listening. And Architecto said, I just joined, but I'd follow along. And Drew also says, it's so interesting, not hard to follow at all, I think. Thank you for teaching. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. I know I've said that a few times already, but I really do appreciate you guys being patient with me. And I'm doing my best to share what I know. And I realize that it may still be a little bit long-winded and maybe a bit rambly at parts, but in time I'll continue to improve the way that I teach as well. Alright Yomi, thanks a lot for dropping by. I'll see you around on your streams next time perhaps. Oh, okay, awesome. Well, have fun drawing, and if you're going to be streaming later on, and by the time I'm done, I might catch you on yours later on. Take care. And Hobo says, glad I found your channel, this is very informative. Oh, I'm very happy to hear that. And Jimmy says, aren't you tempted to skip the stretching, or whatever little talks you have on your list? I have great daily plans, but usually I'm so dragged into a task I just skip all plan and just do this one thing. I do. It happen to me a lot, but it really helps. The stretching helps me to peel myself away from my work and just come back feeling a bit more refreshed. And not to mention the fact that, well, it helps me to not get as many wrist pains and all of that. And I think because it's difficult, I do it. It's so easy to get into the zone and get carried away. But I try to hold myself accountable and be as disciplined as I can. And I think that in itself is a very valuable skill to learn. And hey Art Guy Pius, great to see you. And hey Veronica, great to see you as well. Welcome. Alright, so without further ado, last round guys, so let's get to the colors. So I'm going to create a checklist on the side as well. So hopefully this will make it easier to follow along. So first of all, before we start, what I think the most important thing to establish is sky. Why is the sky so important? Well, from the sky color, it will actually dictate a lot of the color choices that we'll be making. So for example, the areas that are in the shadow will be determined by the color of the sky. And second of all, even within the sky, you can get a little bit of a hint of what the light color is. You'll notice that with the reference image, there's a slight bit of yellowness at the bottom and it's brighter. So you can kind of take a guess that the lighting will be a bit bright and a bit yellowish and warm as well. And yes, Veronica, definitely, it dictates the mood of the piece. So I found that it really helps to start with that. You don't have to, but it's something. It's something that helps me to stick to something. So actually before that, I'll make sky second. But before that, I'm just going to under painting. So I'm sure some of you guys have seen in traditional painting that they sometimes add in a glaze of color underneath things to just give a little bit of warmth or coolness to the image. And I'm gonna do the same as well with mine. So I'm just using color balance, and the shortcut on Photoshop is Ctrl B, and I'm just adding a tinge of warmth to everything. It's not necessary, but you can do it, and you'll notice something as well later on as we go on. So this is the sky, and what I'm gonna do is that I think here's the really, what do you call it? You can say the magical part of things. But before that, let me actually see if I can share my color wheel. because I think it'll be really important for you guys to see the color choices that I'm making right now. So, one moment. Chrome Blender. Let me try to add in a source. Color. There we go. This is actually super important. So I'm going to be covering my face, not coloring my face. So hopefully you guys don't mind missing out on my face for about half an hour. It'll be back, don't worry. Oh no. There we go. Okay, so. Alright, Fantas, thanks a lot for joining in, man. And hope you have a good night. Okay, fantastic. Alright, so what I'm gonna do, and this is the magical part. So what I'm gonna do is color pick color pick the value and the color that we've already established so far. And what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to shift it over to the color that I see, to the hue that I see right now on my reference image. And I'm guessing it's around here. It's around here. So I'm gonna test it out. It's in between blue and cyan. And what I'm going to do is use my gradient tool, or you can manually paint. Actually, I'll manually paint. And I'm actually just gonna color it in right now. And maybe it's a little bit too desaturated. So I'm going to pump up the saturation a bit. And I'm going to make a selection of the sky and just use a gradient tool. I think it'll just make it a bit cleaner. And since I'm noticing that the sky is a little bit brighter, and because the sky is still considered to be in the light, I'm just gonna pump up my values a bit. And what I'm gonna do when I'm doing these kinds of selections is that looking at this value range, remember that this is all the real estate that we can play with. And if the value of this color is here so far in the middle, then I'm going to pump it up a little bit more. And I'm actually going to just pump it up by one step. So what I mean by that is that if this whole bar is divided into 5 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to shift it from a 3 to a 2. So I'm going to select here and then pump it up to the middle. And then maybe increase the saturation a bit. Oh no, my bad. So I'm going to create the selection from the sky. Oh no, sorry guys. So I'm gonna, there we go. I think it's a little bit better. It's all normal. It's all normal in Architecto. And maybe not yellow. It looks like it's maybe a little bit here in this color. So it's a little bit more in the cyan. And worst comes to worst, guys, you can always color pick a little bit from your reference image just to check, but don't get reliant on it. And we'll just do a quick value check. And if you squint your eyes while looking at the piece, you'll notice that there is a small gradient, but as a whole, it's still the same. It's more or less the same value. And we're essentially going to just, so tip, just get the most from a hue shift. If not enough shift value. But overall, mostly just play with hue plus saturation. Because if you look at my color wheel here, it says hue, H for hue, S for saturation, and B for brightness. Why we work in values first is that we take out the factor of brightness. So that really simplifies the process moving forward. And all we have to really worry about is hue and saturation. And another good tip as well is that instead of really worrying too much about color, think of color temperature. So is it warm dominant image or cool dominant image? In this case, referring to my reference image, what do you guys think? Is this more of a warm dominated image or cool dominated image? So I'm just gonna give you guys a moment to respond while I take a sip of water. And few art says just get good. Well, that too, but this is part of the process, right? Yeah, and Jimmy and Architecto says warm. And yes, exactly. So when you have something that is a dominant color temperature, dominant color temp usually means that it's more saturated. Yeah, exactly. So it is warm, guys. So you're spot on that. So your warmer colors are going to be more saturated and your cool colors are going to be more desaturated in comparison. So I just colored in the sky, and what I'm going to do next is color in the clouds actually. You can use the color layer, Jimmy, but I feel like it might be a bit too limiting, but you can still get a lot of the same effect just by using normal. So what I'm gonna do here is actually move on to the architecture first. I know I said the clouds, but just for the sake of showing more progress with this image, I'm just creating a new layer on top of this, guys. So I'm gonna select the color that I have, or the value that we've already established here, and I'm going to actually make it this color, more of a reddish kind of roof. So I'm gonna shift my color wheel to the red. You'll notice that I haven't touched the brightness. It's just that color select, shift towards the red, and that's it. And then I'm gonna paint it on. But immediately I'm noticing that, man, that's a really dull color. So what I'm gonna do is increase the saturation. So you can just do it from the slider here if you want as well. And you'll notice that, wow, the color actually is already quite close to the reference image already. And Drew asked, do you have any tips about warm light equals cool shadows, or is that for a later part? We'll get to that, but I'm just starting with the light area first. We'll get there. But if you have a warm light on a warm local color, it'll be even warmer. So maybe I can even push the saturation a bit more. And that still works just fine, as you can see. And then more warm here as well. And then I'm going to color select this area. And I actually want it to be this, more of this really intense warm brick. So let's just try to match the color. And from what it looks like, it's a little bit yellowish. So I'm gonna just move the hue. So once again, components of a color are hue, saturation, and brightness or value. So since we've already established the brightness, we're just gonna worry about the hue first. So I'm gonna shift it a little bit towards the proper hue. Let's test it. and it's super dull. So what are we gonna do next? Pump up the saturation. Just pump it up. But you'll notice that it's kind of going down in brightness, so just move it up a bit more. Still a bit too dull, so I'm just gonna move the saturation across here. And hey, there we go, we're getting somewhere, guys. It's very close to the reference image. Or we can even shift a little bit more towards yellow, because inherently yellow is a brighter value than orange, and even more so than red. So by naturally pushing towards the yellow hue, our color will actually get brighter by itself. So that's something to keep in mind, but I don't want it to be too yellow. So I still want it to be orangish. So that can be another great tip to remember. Local hues or hues has its own difference in values. So even though we start from the same value, just by actually shifting things on the color wheel, it will vary in terms of darkness and brightness. So that's something to keep in mind, guys. So I'm just going to quickly color it in. So I'm gonna make this white part this kind of color, so it's light cream color. But right now I'm just gonna color in the colors. So once again, so far we've only shifted the hue, guys. We haven't even really touched hue and saturation. And look at all the nice colors that we're getting so far. And we're not even done with the image yet. So next, just to fast forward a bit, we're going to try and match that color and then push it towards the right hue. So first of all, hue first, then saturation. Let's test the hue. It's too damn bright and pale, so let's push the saturation. I like it, but I want it to be a bit darker. So this is one of those instances. Once again, we have more real estate to play with. So I'm gonna try and match this to... So once again, this is the whole value range, right? And you have the same value range in your color wheel here. So I'm just gonna push it down towards a 2. Just so it's a bit darker. And then I want it to be more saturated. There we go, that's much better. So in these instances, if you want to adjust things a bit more, you can. But try to just work within the values, the hue first. If the hue isn't enough, try the saturation. And if saturation and hue isn't enough, then you can work with the values a bit more as well. So you're working down the list. And Jimmy asked, the glaze you started with should be considered as overall feeling of the temperature of or the environment light. It can be. I'll have to formulate my thoughts on that a bit more, so I can't say for sure. And Few Art says, would you shift the hue in the hue direction of a reflective object with another color in close proximity? Not really the case here. I think that's another complexity we can worry about later, but right now I'm just worrying about the individual local colors. Because once you think about bounce light and then Fresnel and then reflective objects and then ambient occlusion, highlights, all of those things will layer on more complexities as we go. But just so that we don't overcomplicate things now, let's just stick to what we have. Alright, so just to speed things up, guys, so it's going to be the exact same methods in the shadow. So however, in this case, what I'll do is that I'll pick, once again, the same value that we've already established, and I'll look at my reference image. So let's see where red would be. So red would be around here. So I'm going to, since the skylight is blue, the blue is around here in the color wheel. Around here in the color wheel. And then the red is here. So this is the red we have, and then the blue is around here. So notice as I color pick, where this little dot is going. The red is here, and then the blue is here. So halfway there. So let's just say around, maybe not halfway, but maybe a third of the way there. So if you mix blue with red, you're gonna get purple, right? But let's not make the purple too intense. And when you go from warm to a cool, instead of actually keeping the saturation the same, you want to lower it down. You want to lower the saturation down. But now the difference is that we want to change the hue. Wait, we color pick first, then we change the hue, and then lower the saturation. And that's the color that you're gonna get. And you can try going midway, but I feel like that's a maybe okay. Maybe it's okay. What do you guys think? Or maybe a little bit more reddish. Yeah, maybe a bit more reddish. Yeah, I think maybe a bit more reddish, and even with a bit more saturation. But it's so dark at that point that it probably doesn't matter too much. So in any case, I'll just start applying that to all of the other areas in the piece. Okay, now for this color, and then going by relativity, we're actually going to make this a bit brighter, because even in the light area, the roof is darker than this brick. So as a result, this brick will be lighter than the roof even in the shadow area. So we're going to color pick the value, shift it up a bit by brightness, and once again, remember to stick within this value range. Don't exceed it. So I'm going to push it up a bit, and maybe even manually do it on the slider. Color pick, manually slide it on the slider, and then I'll push it. Actually, yeah. And then I'm going to push it towards less saturation, because when you have a really warm color, in a cool light, it'll most likely be desaturated. With a slight hue shift. So I'm gonna quickly layer this on. And then here as well, it's gonna be even brighter. So I'm gonna take this value, push it up. Once again, sticking within that value range we've established for ourselves, and then desaturate it. There we go. So we're maintaining all of that color relationship even in the shadow. There we go, guys. And then I'm just gonna make this part darker here, since it's a little strange that it was different. And we can even push it towards the cools a bit. Let's take a bit of artistic liberty and say that more of the skylight is being reflected here, so we can have a bit more of the cools shining through. And I think that looks really nice. Yeah, I think I should have done it a bit more. Oops, sorry. But like I said, when you have a really warm, you'll notice that the saturation is here, and then the coolness is around here. So the way that I see it in my mind, as crazy as it may sound, let me do a snipping tool. Let me do this. Paste. It's really huge. Let me do this, and then I will also do the saturation here. A moment, guys, hang in there. So why I choose to desaturate it is that if you imagine this, let's just say I flip this arrow and I see the amount of distance. So this is saturation. This is the saturation, right? So I see what's the between point of this, and it's around here. So when I actually shift it towards cool, it's not completely pushing towards the cool. It's actually still within the warms, but a desaturated warm. So that's how I think about it. And then when you think about where the positioning of yellow and blue is on the scale, on the color wheel, they're complementary colors. So I don't really have to shift the hues, and I just have to push it towards desaturated. And by pushing towards desaturated, it'll give the impression that it's become cooler, because the opposite of warm is cool, and by desaturating something and you keep on pushing towards the cool, the cooler that it'll get. So that's why here I'm keeping the same values. So once again, color picking where the value was, and then sticking to where it was here, and then desaturating it, just desaturating it, and then making it brighter because I want to compensate for the local color differences. And then that's, yeah, maybe a bit more like this. I think you may be right. So maybe more like that. Sorry, Drew. I'll move my mic up. It's a little bit too low. It's a little bit strange for me to have it like all the way up here. But it's okay. But yeah, as I was saying though, that's how I choose the colors. And and Pew Art says cooler colors have less saturation because they are in the shadows here and have less range. Less range, but in the end cools and warms would depend on the hue and saturation. So not necessarily that, but when you're working within this very narrow color range already, then the saturation and the differences will be much more subtle. And thanks a lot, Sesame. Hopefully you're finding it useful so far. So let me just, we've got 8 seconds left. So let me just quickly Alright guys, before we actually go on that stretch break, this is actually one of the moments where I'm gonna fast forward a bit. Actually, you know what? Let me take a very quick stretch break still. And then we'll very quickly finish the studies. And then finally moving on to a feedback session. So I know it's been a long one today guys, and I think I might have mistimed it a bit. But I really appreciate you guys sticking through. I'm just gonna get some more water and take a quick toilet break. Alright, I'm back. Let's finish this sucker off. So I'm just gonna speed through it guys, just to make sure that we have something finished by the end of the stream. But you'll notice once again though, if I turn off the values, you'll notice that if you squint your eyes, you'll probably barely notice that there has been much changes that have been made. And I'm really trying my best to adhere to the value structure that I've already established at the start. And that's how powerful I think this method can be. So I'm gonna speed through now. So this is going to be more of the speed that I would be doing it if I was not doing a demonstration of it. And thanks a lot for the follow, Blue Blader J and Dag15. Really appreciate it. So let's do that. And then for the windows, more of this color. So how's everyone doing with their own studies? Hopefully you guys are still able to keep up and are still doing it with me. And if so, you guys definitely deserve a medal. So I'm gonna make this a bit darker. This is probably one of those instances where I'll make it even darker. Maybe saturated. Oop. And Jimmy says, at which point do we consider different values for things closer to the camera and further away, even with such narrow depth scene as this one? You can add it in later on, but you can add a layer of atmosphere later on. I'll show you how you can do it after this, but otherwise, you can also establish it in the value range and still pick the correct colors based off the values that you've already established. So basically, either you choose to do more of the calculations and more of the compensation for atmosphere and all those things in the value phase, or you can do it in the color stage. So whichever you want to do and when you want to do it is up to you. Although on a personal level, I think I like to keep my values a bit more simple. So for this one, I actually want to make it a more of a cooler gray brick. Maybe even so maybe a bit of color variance just to indicate that it's showing the sky hitting it. So I'm picking this value, shifting it towards blue, making it a bit brighter because it's reflecting more of the sky. And then maybe shift it a bit brighter, a bit more desaturated. And once again, the dominant temperature is warm, so there's no reason the saturation needs to be so high. It looks a bit off, in fact. So I'm gonna continue to decrease the saturation and shift the blues towards the cyans a bit more. There we go. I think that's a bit better. And Drew said, no medal for me, but definitely a high grade. I learned a lot. Fantastic. Sesame says, no medal for me as I showed up late, but we'll definitely rewatch and try to do the studies. Awesome. Yeah, feel free to just do these studies later on as well, guys. And if you do, please let me know. I would really love to see what you guys... Actually, no, I'm not too happy with it. But I would really love to see what you guys have come up with. And to see that if this study has been helpful for you guys. So in a sense, you guys are kind of like my guinea pigs, just to test out if these theories are any helpful or not. So I'm also just gonna show this part, Terminator shadow. So I'm gonna make this extra saturated. So this is imitating the glow that you'd get when there's a lot of bright light hitting an object and it's being seen on the edge of the shadow, and it's called the Terminator. So the glow from the Terminator. Alright, so now I can just do the clouds. Let's just look at a different reference image. So, making it a bit warm. White will generally reflect the most of the colors that's being shown on it. So you sometimes don't have to do too much for objects that are nearly pure white. So that's quite useful to know. And then shadows, I'll move it towards a 2. A bit more desaturated. So I'm kind of winging it on the clouds. I don't have the proper reference image now, but it's okay. Let's just finish things off. I'll make it even brighter actually. And then here I'll shift it towards the greens. Oh no, yellowish. Just because this is still in the light area. And then since we're warm color dominant, I'm gonna move it towards the yellow a bit more. But I'm gonna introduce some sort of shadow, push it within the shadow range that we've established towards a bit more of the greens, maybe a bit brighter so it's not too harsh. Oh, and not to mention it's in atmosphere, so this is where I would start considering it a bit more Jimmy. So I shift it a bit higher with the brightness, so as you can see I'm compensating for the atmosphere a bit more. Otherwise those trees will appear too damn close. That's not what we want at all. And then maybe just for fun though. So if we have the same tree in the foreground here, it'll most likely be about this color. I'm gonna compensate for a little bit of the bounce light coming from the sky by shifting the color wheel towards the blue and then brightening a bit. Since if it's a reflection of the sky, it'll turn a bit brighter. I'm gonna add a bit of ambient occlusion down at the base. So here as well. Here. Alright, and there we have it guys. I'll just leave the color study at this stage. But let's turn off all of the colors that we've done. So this is just what we had in values. And I'm gonna slowly turn on the colors. And squint your eyes as I do this guys. Wait, so this is the values, sorry. And squint your eyes as I do this. And I wanna see how much difference you guys actually notice. And you'll probably notice it's not that much. We're adhering to the value range we've already established at the start. And all you really have to do is play around with the hue and the saturation, and then maybe a bit of the brightness if needed. But if you adhere to that, then you're going to be able to still stick to your original plan. So yeah, there you have it guys. That's my method for doing color studies. And hopefully that has been helpful. And if you guys have been following along, please post up what you've done so far on the Discord server, and I'd love to see what you guys are doing. And I'll just remove the color wheel. There we go, back to my face. Thanks a lot for the follow, Sunstone and Frosty Shark, really appreciate it. And Fuse says, so you pick the brightness in the beginning and color pick and then play around, right? Yes, pretty much. You just color pick your values that you've established, select until the hue is just right, and if you have the right reference image, then I think most people should be able to have a decent enough color sense to kind of guesstimate. And layers wise, it's very minimal, Alexaniel. I just have the values, so this is literally all the layers that's on top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what I'll be doing later on though, guys, is that I'll be posting up the PSD for this study. So if you're interested in just picking through the layers for yourself, then be sure to join in on my Discord server, which you can find in the link below. And you guys will be the first to hear about it and access it as well. So this is what I mean by some of the exclusive Discord content that my viewers and members will get. Oh, I forgot my water bottle. I left it out there. Thanks a lot for the follow, Scrappy. Really appreciate it. So yes, that'll be wrapping up for the color studies today, guys. So let's actually just take a moment for a breather.